Hey everybody, it's Azra Moore with Aromac Real Estate Team, and in this video, we're going to talk about the home inspection process and what you need to know as a seller. So before we get started, please hit that like button, hit subscribe, and let's talk about home inspections. So when most of us think about home inspections, the first thing we think of is the dreaded buyer's inspection, right? Whether you're the seller or the buyer, it's under contract and you get your fingers crossed and you're praying and hoping that there's no major issues. Because if you're the seller, there's no major issues. That means you get to sell your home, move on with the next chapter of your life. If you're the buyer, that means if there's no major issues, you're probably buying your dream home. So it's a high stress period. That's probably the highest stress point of the whole transaction, because both sides know that one major issue or minor issue could cause the whole deal to fall apart, especially if it's a first-time home buyer and there's a laundry list of things on that inspection. They're going to panic. And if they don't have a good agent that can say, hey, a lot of this is normal, a lot of it's minor, they're going to walk and say, oh, that's too much. We need to move on. We want the perfect house with nothing wrong. We want them to fix everything. And that's not the reality. Let's talk about how do we avoid that as the seller. But first, let's talk about what a home inspection is for those that don't know. So a home inspection is when you hire a professional, a home inspector. They're typically trained and licensed. Out here in Texas, they're licensed. And they'll go through and they're going to, from top to bottom, from roof to floor, and even below floor if you have a crawl space, if you have a pier and beam house, they're going to check for all the issues and they're going to give you a report. That's the simplified version. They're going to check electrical, they're going to check HVAC, they're going to check the roof for like hail hits, bad shingles, leaks. They're going to be in the attic. They're going to be checking every inch of your home to try and make sure that it's up to code. So that's their guideline, is whatever the current building code is. And that varies from city to city, believe it or not. So this is where it's super crucial as the seller to get an inspection. Again, we're not talking about the buyer's inspection when it's already under contract. As the seller, I encourage you to get your own inspection prior to even listing the home. So when I go to a listing appointment and I talk with a potential client about listing their home, one of the first things I ask them is if they've had an appraisal and if they've had a home inspection. If they haven't had a home inspection, I ask them why. Usually the answer is, well, I'll just wait till the buyer does the inspection. Now let's rewind and think about the stress factor, right? They're literally saying, I'm willing to gamble that everything's okay and that we'll close and I don't have any issues. And most agents are like, okay, great. Yep, sounds great. I will tell you, as a younger agent, I did the same thing, because when I used to buy houses as an investor, my realtors would tell me the same thing. Oh, don't worry about it. Well, once you fix the house up, no need to get an inspection. We're sure all the work you did on the rehab is good. We'll just wait for the buyer to get here and then they'll get their inspection and then you'll know what's wrong. Potentially setting everybody up for failure. So I've learned as I've gotten older and wiser, or at least older, that it is super important as the seller to get your own inspection before you even list. So let's go back. I'm at this listing appointment. I'm talking to you and we're talking about everything. I'm looking at the home. I say, okay, so how did your home inspection go? Oh, I haven't got one. Okay, great. When do you want to schedule it? It's that serious. I mean, it's not a requirement, but I highly recommend it to any potential seller that I meet. And again, the reason is you want to avoid all this stress later on in the transaction. Why wouldn't we avoid it if we can? So a home inspection is typically between $300 and $500. And again, guys, it's going to be money well spent on the front end. So let's talk about the process of preparing for this home inspection. It's just like preparing your house to list. First thing I'm going to tell you to do as an agent is to clean and declutter. So you're already cleaning and decluttering, but this is also going to be beneficial for the home inspection. You want to make sure that they can get to everything. You want a bunch of furniture blocking doorways, attic access, crawl space access, plumbing access, any of that. You want to make sure that there's no obstacles that they can't do their job. And I recommend that the inspection is done a couple weeks before we list the home. The reason being is you're going to get this nice lovely report when they're done that explains all the issues that they found. And so you can go through one by one and fix them. You don't have to fix everything. And if you check in the description, there's a link to a download for a seller's checklist. And this is perfect for this situation. It goes through and highlights what should be repaired and what shouldn't be repaired based off of the price point. Is it cost effective? How difficult is it? And is it going to add value to your home? So it's perfect to take that list and put it up against that report and make educated decisions on what you fix and what you don't fix. So there's no surprises when they get to their buyer's inspection. So again, I have a link in the description. If you want to download that, it'll help you make decisions. But typically the agent's going to help you with that, and we'll get into that later. So as you prepare for that home inspection and you declutter and clean, I also recommend that you make any of the small repairs that you already know need to be repaired. And by repairs, I mean something as simple as light bulbs, guys. How many of you right now can walk through your home and know at least 1 or 2 light bulbs are out? In a ceiling fan, in the bathroom vanity, something that you're like, it's still enough light, and you'll get around to it tomorrow, next weekend, whatever. Those are easy, but they're going to get hit on an inspection if you don't fix them. And guess what? If they still don't light, that means there's probably a bigger issue than just a light bulb being out, and you may need to replace the whole fixture. But you're not doing any major repairs or anything that you're outside your comfortability zone. Now, I say that if you know your roof needs to be replaced, or you know you have like a slab leak under the house, fix that before you even do the inspection. That way, the inspector gets to see the brand new roof, and then they get to see if there's any issues with it. If anything major that you know or are planning to do, and again, this is something you can discuss with an agent, do that before the inspection. And the other thing I want to stress is if you know there's an issue, don't hide it from the inspector, especially you're hiring this person to do the inspection, right? Don't hide it from them. Be honest with them. If they say, hey, have you noticed any issues with this before? If the answer is yes, say yes. You're trying to find all the issues so you can fix them. So please give full disclosure with your home inspector, just like you should be giving full disclosure with your agent, because we're here to help. All right, so now let's talk about what to do during the inspection. First thing is, I recommend you be home for the whole inspection. Inspection is usually about 3 hours, 2 hours on the low end, 4.5 hours on the high end, depending on the size of your house and how old it is. If you can't be there, let your agent know and make sure you can schedule it to when they can be there. They're not going to follow your inspector around, and neither should you, but it's a nice peace of mind knowing that somebody's sitting there, right? And then if they have a question, they can ask the agent. If I know the answer, I know the answer. If not, maybe I can text you because you're at work. But what you want to definitely do is try and be there for the last hour of the inspection, because normally that's when they go over everything in person. And again, if you can't, you can't, but make sure at least your agent is able to be there. And most agents are good at understanding the inspection report, so they can relay that stuff to you, because again, we do this every day. I've talked to dozens of inspectors. I have a couple that I really, really like. I have a couple that I think are a little bit over the top. And then there's ones that I feel like they didn't do enough, and I don't work with them anymore. So having that understanding is super helpful from an agent standpoint, but as the homeowner, you want to be there so we can all talk about it together. But if you are there, what you absolutely don't want to do is follow the inspector around like a puppy dog. Please don't do that. They hate it. It's going to take up more time. They're going to get distracted. They may miss things, and don't try and fix things on the go. I had a seller that used to do that, and about halfway through the inspection, the inspector said, hey, I need you to handle your seller. And I was a younger agent, again, pretty early in my career. And I was like, oh, whoa. And so what he was doing is, I'd say a door didn't close properly. The homeowner would then get his tools, fix the door on the spot, and then go find the inspector and say, hey, look, like I fixed it. Don't put that in the report. But again, this was during the buyer's inspection. So the buyer hired this inspector. And so the inspector was getting very annoyed. And he asked me, hey, can you keep this guy away from me for the rest of the inspection? And honestly, he just made it worse. So now the inspector's nitpicking everything because he's annoyed by the seller. So again, we can eliminate all that by you doing it and hiring the inspector before it even goes on. So now you hired him. Not that they're doing you any favors, not that they're cutting corners, but now you can have the conversations because you hired them and their job is to talk to you and help you understand. When the buyer hires them, a lot of times they don't even want the seller there. So you don't get to hear verbatim necessarily what the inspector is telling the buyer. They're telling the buyer, and the buyer's turning around and telling you what they want fixed based off of what the inspector and them talked about. You're getting things third hand where you can just avoid all this by getting the inspection on the front end and being there the last 30 minutes for them to explain it. Once they explain it, you're going to get a nice fancy report like we talked about earlier. They typically email it right away unless you haven't paid them. So I recommend you pay them, and then you'll get this report emailed, and you can literally sit with your agent and compare it against that checklist and say, okay, electrical plugs, they recommend replacing all the plugs in the whole house. And then you look at the checklist and say, is it worth it or not? And you'll talk with your agent. Every house is a little bit different. Every neighborhood, the age of the house, all the things come into play. So something that may or may not be on the checklist, your agent may give you a different answer, or I may give you a different answer based on your actual property, your house that we're looking at and walking through. But again, this is where you fix all the little things. Oh, I can fix that door. I can straighten that. I can do that. You take care of all the little things, and then you decide what big things need to be done. And guess what? If you don't do them all, it's okay, but you still have to disclose it in the seller's disclosure. So you got this inspection, you fixed 9 out of 10 things, and that 10th thing is, say, that door, the door that doesn't close right. You're like, I don't want to be bothered with it. I'm not going to fix it. You just disclose that you know that that door doesn't close right. So that way, when the buyers put an offer in on it and the buyer's inspector notes that same door doesn't close right, they were already aware. So we're not negotiating a bunch of repairs. We might be negotiating one, maybe a few. Maybe the buyer's inspector catches 1 or 2 things that your inspector didn't catch. Or maybe things changed in that 2 or 3 weeks between the buyer's inspection and the seller's inspection, and maybe, a light bulb went out. Nothing major, right? But if they're like, hey, the roof is leaking, we think the plumbing needs to be replaced, the electrical needs to be updated, it's a shock to you as the seller, and it's a hell of a shock to the buyer who thought, hey, in 3 more weeks, we're going to be moving into this home, and it's going to be where we're going to start our new family, and suddenly their hopes and dreams are crushed, and they panic, and they run away and look for another house, right? And so I can't stress how important it is to get your own inspection as a seller before you even list, so you can avoid these problems. These people are your friends on the front end, right? They're your friends on the front end. So look at that as opportunity to fix these problems and possibly add value to your home that wasn't already there. How awesome is that? You kind of got to think, why aren't sellers doing this, right? And again, it's due to lack of education from a lot of agents out there who were grandfathered into the same way I was, guilty that, hey, let the buyers do it. It'll save you a couple $100, but is a couple $100 worth the stress when it's under contract and you're negotiating repairs that you didn't even know you needed for a few $100 that you saved on the front end? You start this cycle and this chain, and you're setting yourself up for failure when it's so easy to just avoid all this. And again, guys, you may not fix everything. You may not want to fix everything. You may not be able to afford to fix everything, but at least you know the issues. You can address the ones that you can address, and you can disclose everything else. So that way, when the buyer puts an offer on your house, they know what's wrong, or at least they know what you know was wrong with the house. And there's a lot less surprises. And it's going to help that transaction go a lot smoother, and it's going to gravely decrease the risk of a buyer backing out once they put your home under contract. The last thing I want to do as an agent is make that call and say, hey, the buyer's got the inspection back and they don't even want to negotiate anything. They decided to walk because there was too many issues. I've made that call and I don't like it. And I know this, you as a seller, you don't want to hear that. But I can't make the other side negotiate if they think there's too many issues, too many repairs, not worth the price. There's nothing I can do as the listing agent to convince them. So now guess what? You're still left in the dark as the seller, and I have to call you and say, hey seller, bad news, they're terminating. You're gonna say, why? Well, they said they found some stuff in the inspection. Well, what was it? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? They wouldn't tell me. What do you mean they wouldn't tell you? They don't have to tell me because they paid for the inspection, so it's up to them to disclose what they found. So I highly recommend that you now get an inspection and make any repairs that you need to make, and let's take it off the market for a couple weeks while we do that. That's the last call I want to have to make, guys, but I've had to do it, and it can be so easily avoided if you just get an inspection up front. And again, you may not get that inspection, you may take the gamble, but at least you're educated and you know the potential downfalls. So hopefully this video was helpful for you, and you now understand the importance of getting an inspection, not just as a buyer, but as a seller on the front end. Again, I'm Azra Moore. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you on the next video.